the featured teller, I want to point out that Catherine is a very good cook. She makes really good greasy beans. Her homegrown vegetable soup is as good as my mother's. Tastes a whole lot like it. And her roast chicken will just melt in her mouth. And her brownies, they're almost as good as the ones I make. Okay, enough of those jokes. It's not about me, okay? Okay, they are getting back in. Tonight, we have as our featured teller, as if you haven't figured that out, Catherine Yale Sirota. She's going an extra mile tonight. So I'm not going to add much to my previous introduction, but I will point out that Wallace ceded his spot to her so she could tell a couple of more stories from her book. So please welcome back to the stage, Catherine.
Thank you once again, John. Well, if y'all can stand it, I've got two more stories from my earlier years. When I was 5 years old, Mother and Daddy and I moved from Haw Creek across the highway and built a house. Now, my mother was, as you heard earlier, a professor of botany, and her thumb was green all the way up to her shoulder. She purposed to populate our acre lot with live Christmas trees, spruce that could be decorated and lit and then taken outside to live and thrive in the front yard. She loved those trees. And every year, in the first weekend of November, Mother and I had a beautiful outing to Jesse Israel's nursery and farm out in Candler, North Carolina. We would go out there and tag a tree, and then Mother would walk the nursery and the fields with Jesse, talking about new plants and loving up on old favorites. After that, we would go to Biltmore Dairy Bar on the way home and always had that rich, creamy Biltmore ice cream made adjacently just on the estate. It was a delightful outing. On the way home, we usually picked up to-go items from Buck's Drive-In on Tunnel Road in Asheville. That was my daddy's favorite. And then in a few weeks, Daddy and I would get in the big Ford truck and drive back to Israel's and bring home the balled and burlapped spruce. And then we would begin all the decorating and the joyous season. While we were gone, Mother would make wonderful Christmas goodies. She was a good baker. I wonder why I never learned from her, but she was a master baker. She would make sugar cookies in wondrous shapes covered with colorful icings and that beautiful rainbow candy sprinkles that we all used to just open the bottle and drink, and silver shots sometimes, not bullets. And I'm sorry, I just added that in, not bullets. And she would make all kinds of fudge with pecans and walnut and sometimes almonds. So good. And she made fruitcake. And I mean, this was real tasty fruitcake. It had currants and raisins and pecans and walnuts and glacéed red cherries. None of that weird, crazy yellow and green stuff in her fruitcake. And most admirably, beautiful walnut divinity, my father's favorite. While she was doing that, my dad was out getting the tree. And it never failed to disappoint. He always brought home the tree, the very exact one that Mother and I had tagged. Now, I want you to know that the live tree and the Asheville Symphony's presentation of the Messiah and the Christmas goodies and the Asheville Christmas Parade were all part of Mama's holiday traditions. And you better believe that she loved them and defended it. Okay. It had come the time for the happiest part of the season, the Asheville Christmas parade. And the next afternoon, we drove downtown to see it. Oh, it was marvelous. The street lights were all festooned with beautiful colored lights and Christmas decorations. The shop windows were ablaze with embellishments of gold and red and green. And then the parade started. There were dozens of floats, beautifully decorated, and featuring religious communities with living nativities and singing congregants. There were other floats that advertised civic organizations and businesses in the area. Just lovely, sweeping down the drive. It almost looked like as if they had skirts on them, and they were wafting in the breeze as they rolled happily along. People on those floats flung wrapped candies and pennies at the onlookers, and the children scrambled to get all of those. Now, there were also high school marching bands from all over western North Carolina. And there were fire engines from every community in western North Carolina. Yes, even Brevard, John's hometown. And they were squelching and their sirens were blaring. Oh, it was a cacophony of noise. There were also horse riders and clowns that were walking and capering along, and jugglers and acrobats flipping all over the street. Oh, the view of those floats and everything that I saw passing by, the colors, the noise, and the band's percussion sections all beat in my chest, made it hard to breathe. I barely had enough air to croak out, "Hey, Santa," when he appeared. Oh, it would be so hard to go to sleep that night. Well, the next morning, my daddy was up. He was fixing us breakfast. Being an early bird, he'd already been up in the attic and had brought down those big boxes of lights and decorations that went on the outside of the house and set them out in the front yard. He got hold of me, handed me a $20 bill, and he whispered, "After you and Mama make some goodies and y'all go uptown, you buy her a nice present with this money. When you get back, there will be a big surprise for you in the living room." Oh boy, I thought, the tree will be up and we can decorate it. Well, Mother and I did make wonderful goodies while Daddy went out to deal with the tree. We made red and white swirled candy cane cookies. So cute. And we made chocolate pecan fudge and divinity, walnut divinity. As I said before, that was Daddy's favorite. Then we got dressed and we drove uptown. We visited Ivy's and John Carroll's, and across the street we went to Bon Marché. Now, the interior of that store was a true fantasy. There were swags of greenery with lights woven through them that were fastened to the corners of the first floor of that store, and they met in a middle of the store in a huge crush of multicolored glass bulbs and balls and ribbons and gold ribbons. I can see it in my mind's eye now. Such a magical place for a young child. The store was full of excited shoppers and perfumed air and Christmas music and mannequins, all dressed in sumptuous furs and holiday finery. "Now, ladies, don't gape," said Mother, as I twirled and whirled to catch all of the sights and the sounds and the smells of all those marvelously fragrant perfumes. I took the $20 bill Daddy had given me, and I sneaked over to the Charles of the Ritz counter and bought Mother a tall, stately, sculpted bottle of hand lotion. Daddy called it Charles of the Snoots. Well, Mother pretended to browse the glove counter while I made my purchase, and outside one of the huge glass windows outside of Bon Marché was dressed up and decorated just like a fantasy forest. There were child-sized brown velvet teddy bears. They were dressed in red vests and white Peter Pan collars and shiny black patent leather boots. And they were bowing and kicking to "It's beginning to look a lot like Christmas. Everywhere you go, bow, kick." Children outside the store had their faces plastered up against the glass, gazing in wonder at the mechanized bears, while their mamas, come along now, come away," pulling them away. Over on Patton Avenue at the man's store, Mama bought Daddy a new camel's hair overcoat, and she gave me a $20 bill. To dress up that coat, I selected a brown and tan paisley silk tie. Well, our eyes were shining with the gifts and the thought of all of the goodies at home and the overwhelming picture of the beautiful tree in the picture window. We danced in through the kitchen door and tapped on the French doors. "Oh, John, may we come in?" trilled Mama. We looked at each other and wriggled with anticipation and delight. "Just a minute, I'm turning on the lights." And then the doors popped open to my father's smiling face, shining with joy. "Come in, my dears, and see your Christmas tree." Well, Mama and I bounded into the living room and whoosh! With one great whoosh, she sucked all the oxygen out of that room. Oh, where were the soft, bouncing limbs, the glowing lights, the hand-blown German glass ornaments? Where were they? And the red-feathered cardinals and the scarlet and the gold bows and all those big, large crystal balls that just held the whole sparkling room in the middle of them, and the lacy china angel. Where were they? A color wheel emitting all kinds of primary colors sat on the floor, throwing colors all over Mother's lovely pink, ivory, and baby blue living room. Standing in the middle of her Italianate drum table in the front window was a 4-foot-high metal pole in a stand with 16 metal arms that were tipped with exploded tinsel rosettes. Tiny, dismal plastic balls hung on the arms of that aberration. Mother swallowed hard. She gave Daddy a thin smile and said, well, actually she croaked, "Oh, John, it's not real." Turning around, she tilted and cruised through the dining room and into the kitchen, touching base with every flooring and a piece of furniture and door facing in her way. Uttering a terrible sigh, she sank down into the kitchen table chair and uttered a series of cries that my father later described discreetly as a dying calf in a hailstorm under a tin roof. Her lips set in a prim, thin line. She picked up that china platter of walnut divinity, and with a flick of her wrist, she sent that in a graceful 4-foot arc bang into the trash can. When that china made a perfect 2-point landing, crash! My startled Siamese cat pirouetted up from her basket and careened around the corner, running into that color wheel that was still whirling and grinding. And her tail bottle brushy, she made quick tracks into an unknown part of the house. Well, that wheel, as I said, was mortally wounded and laying on its side. My father stood there open-mouthed, perplexed. What had he done? He didn't understand. Meanwhile, that wheel was sawing and hawing to the unctuous strains of "Oh, holy night." The year I was 34 years old, Mother and Daddy and I sat on the front porch of the log house that my husband and I had built in Haywood County. We were sitting there rocking away, and spread out below us were 2 of the 21 acres that I would set on our property with Fraser fir. Those beautiful trees were shimmering in the late October sunlight. They were bristling with buyer's tags, and my mother pointed to a stately 8-foot tree and turned to my father and said with just a little bit of attitude, "See, John, that is a real Christmas tree." And she never let him forget it. Thank you. Well, I had one more story, but I really don't think I have quite enough time. I've got 10 minutes, it looks like, but I'm going to go for it. I may leave some out, but you won't know, will you? Unless, of course, you bought my book and you read the story. Okay. This is from a story called Project Management. It was in 4 parts because between the ages of 6 and 11, I had 3 major projects. Now, being a single child, I had to entertain myself a lot, hence the projects. But this story contains project number 4. When I was about 12 years old, something arrived for me in the mail from Texas. It was a folio of large, beautiful 12-inch paper dolls with an eye-popping array of outfits appropriate for a teenager, a 12-inch paper doll teenager, that is. Now, I looked at that very critically, and I thought, by golly, I can design my own wardrobe for that paper doll. So, using school supplies from my daddy's business and my little drafting table, I sat down, got to work, and I designed a whole array of outfits and accessories for a 12-inch paper doll teenager. Now, these were typical of the early 1960s designs, so you can imagine what that looked like. Mother relayed my pleasure in her gift to Aunt Winona, who had sent these things from Fort Worth. Now, Aunt Winona was sure I was growing up to be a barbarian. I had a different thought of it, of course. And in her effort to ladify and civilize Aunt Catherine, she had sent this gift. Well, Mother relayed my pleasure in her gift to her, and she set out from Fort Worth for a visit. Aunt Winona was Mother's eldest sister, and she believed herself to be the better of the entire family, having bettered herself through 3 successive marriages to wealthier men. I couldn't fathom why any man would marry Aunt Winona. She was 6 foot tall, churlish, overbearing, with an ugly hatchet face. Why, one look from that face and a bear would be sent squalling back into the mountains. And my daddy said that if a western diamondback rattler bit her, the poor snake would die. I did not like her visits, for she bullied my mother unmercifully, and she compared my every move, action, and statement unfavorably to her latest husband's golden niece, Amanda. I had a secret fantasy of lining up Aunt Winona and Amanda, who of course would have to stand on a box because Aunt Winona was so darn tall, and slapping both of them through the face in one fell swoop. Whack! Well, Aunt Winona made an ugly little moue with her mouth and sniffed at my paper doll wardrobe. I boiled inwardly inside and stuck out my tongue at her back. Blech. Mother laughed, shook her finger, shook her head. I had to give up my bed to her when she was in town and sleep on the sofa cushions laid on the living room floor. I didn't even have the solace of my Siamese cat. Aunt Winona was mortally terrified of cat scratches and bites, and was sure that my sweet little girl was a vicious killer. I could have told her Nana wouldn't bite her. She preferred to live. Well, that was the state of affairs. It was just not a pleasant situation when Aunt Winona was in town. It was the week of Easter, and Aunt Winona wished to display her largesse by buying me a pair of ladylike white gloves to go with my Easter outfit. I hated gloves. The plan was to drive into town and buy the gloves and come straight away home for Mother's luscious pot roast dinner. So Mother lent her car for the trip, and I very obligingly led the way uptown. We bought the gloves at Ivy's. We drank Coca-Colas at Woolworth's lunch counter, and then we returned to the car. My fourth project was coming together beautifully in my mind. She was in my power now, and I was going to make that trip home memorable. So we drove up Patton Avenue, turned right at Pack Square, went down Biltmore Avenue straight into the village, where we drove up and down the brick and cobblestone streets. I pointed out the shops and All Souls Episcopal Church, the fruit of George Vanderbilt's design. Well, all that's very nice and good, she snapped, but I want to get home. I smiled. Certainly. Well, next, I directed her over the bridge, over the Swannanoa River, turned left, and drove to the back entrance of the Biltmore estate. Now, the porter recognized me because I came along with Mother when she did consultations on horticulture projects there, and the porter waved us on through. I directed Aunt Winona up that serpentine 2-mile drive to the big house and then down back to the conservatory. Then we drove through the woods and by the bass pond, over the waterfall, tooled along the fields down by the river, and fetched up at the dairy barn. I saw many of my friends playing there. They were the children of the employees who worked and lived right there on the estate. We waved to each other, and I asked Aunt Winona to stop. Certainly not. Why is your mother allowing you to consort with farm children? They're dirty ruffians. I want to go home. Yes, ma'am, said Miss Innocence. So we left Biltmore Estate, and instead of turning right and going up the Swannanoa River Road to home, we turned left toward the freight depot down on the French Broad River. Oh, it was a dirty and smelly place. Hovels carpeted the slopes up behind the river, and drunken men lounged around unpainted shacks that discreetly sold liquor out the back door after dark. The river chugged by, swollen with debris and orange from recent storm runoff. The whole place stank. There was offal laying about from a slaughterhouse right down the road, and noxious fumes from several factory smokestacks. Aunt Winona began to gag, and her eyes ran with tears. Why are we here? This is a horrible place. those men, cutthroats and criminals, and those horrid-looking women, slatterns and prostitutes. I don't think this is the way home." "Well, Auntie," said Miss Innocence in her best surprised voice, "I really thought that you would like to see where Daddy comes down to unload boxcars with the boys." "Boxcars? Boys? In this filth?" Ooh, her voice was shrilling up to high C on this one. "Well, Mama knows he does it, Auntie. He does it to keep fit and to keep an eye on the boys from work. Why, he could fight his way out of here if he could. Daddy knows jujitsu." Well, that was not a good answer, and she didn't like it. "I want to go home right now. And, Catherine, if you do not take me out of this place at once..." With a gasp, she fell back against the car seat. Words failed her. Really, she was quiet. Well, I set sail for Lyman Street. A couple miles hence, up Broadway, Chestnut Street, and into the Montford neighborhood. A block over on Pearson Drive, I showed her where I had spent many happy days at Mama Gay's nursery school. "What? Your mother left you here?" Oh, she was getting tuned up again. "Oh, yes, we all loved Mama Gay, but we didn't see Daddy Gay until after lunch when he'd slept off his drunk." "Drunk? Boxcars? And farm children for playmates? I'll have something to say to your mother when we get home." Well, the last stop on Asheville's finer sights was the Riverside Cemetery, 1 block over. We rolled in through the gates and came to an abrupt stop. "And, Catherine, I've had enough. If your mother doesn't discipline you when we get home, I will." And she rolled down the driver's side window, grabbed that bag out of the back seat, and flung it out. The bag floated down upon the grave of a little girl dead in the 1918 flu epidemic, and the white gloves slapped the hovering marble angel right in the face. "So there," she bellowed. Well, I tasted victory. I hugged myself in silent delight, and I managed to exhibit faux humility on the at last trip home. Well, Aunt Winona roared into the house, ranting at Mother and Daddy as she packed up. She called a cab and waited at the curb for it without Mama's delicious roast beef dinner. And she left for the airport and Texas with her wounded dignity. And here's the best part. She never returned. I regained my bed that night and cuddled with my darling Siamese cat. I was only denied dessert at supper for a punishment. I heard Mother and Daddy laughing into the night, and when I finally went to sleep, I congratulated myself on the masterful completion of my 4th project. And one thing that I have maintained throughout my life and learned early on is that persistence and careful planning are elements of successful project management. Thank you.